Directed by Ray Mendoza and Alex Garland, Warfare is about a platoon of American Navy SEALs on a surveillance mission gone wrong in insurgent territory. A boots on the ground story of modern warfare and brotherhood, told in real time and based on the memory of the people who lived it. So, Matt, what do you think of Warfare?
All right, so we're coming off last year's Civil War, which turned out to be quite the Civil War for us in conversation.
Yeah, I don't know how our marriage survived that movie.
The film was quite divisive between the both of us. For anybody who doesn't remember that review, I really, really enjoyed that movie, and you not so much. So here we are with Warfare, which is a realistic perspective on war, because Civil War is more an idea of what future war could look like in our own country. So here we have a real event that occurred as told by the memories of Ray Mendoza, the Navy SEAL who was involved in these events and co-wrote and co-directed the film, as you had said. But like in Civil War, I think Garland is creating a film here that doesn't really have so much overt purpose or meaning. We are here to merely explore these events. And with all that said, I found the film to be quite rattling. I thought it was very immersive and unsettling. I felt this consistent anxiety and nausea about this whole situation that we are witnessing. It's basically this team of Navy SEALs that is looking to get extracted because there are insurgents that are coming in on their position. So they need to get out, and they're trying to coordinate that. But with that being said, I think with Civil War in comparison to this film, I'm going to compare them quite a bit. I thought there was a little bit more to chew on, because these are actually pretty similar films in the way they deal with these events politically speaking.
Yeah,
even
totally.
though one is just an imaginative state of warfare and this one is a more realistic one. But I think there are particular breadcrumbs in this film that do offer some statements in regards to our invasion of Iraq. So I look forward to discussing a little bit of those, as well as the amazing sound design and some other great things about the film.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that there is a bread trail in Civil War that's worth arguing about. This film, I would say there's 2 breadcrumbs that we'll talk about, but that's about it. Garland makes a very intentional decision to box out his film from a particular context, and it's a context with which we at least which I understand and perceive film, which is that they need to have character development. There's some sort of political and environmental context that surrounds them. And usually there's some sort of plot development, which we really don't get here, aside from these men need to leave the building. I mean, that's basically the main plot of the film. And his sole motivation is to replicate the experience of warfare, almost as if everything I just mentioned, character development and etc., is a distraction from his true intention, which is to replicate that experience with as much and grueling intensity as you would expect. I'm making like very positive assumptions here of Alex Garland. I think that its true, most pure devotion to men and women in the military is by doing that without clouding it with, like movie stuff, right?
Yeah.
But I just don't think it's fair to box yourself out from the fundamentals of filmmaking and make yourself exempt from them, because ultimately, and this is just my opinion about how I view films and my viewpoint on what makes a great film, is like if you build a house on kind of a shoddy foundation, then the rest of the house doesn't really matter. Essentially, all of the things that this film intentionally deprives itself of, like well-rounded characters or like interrogation of ideas and politics and intellectual interrogation. In my mind, those are the things that separate films from like theme park rides. And I think that this film sometimes feels like a very unpleasant theme park ride. It's made to, in the same way that when you're on a theme park ride, there's a certain experience and a certain visceral experience that you're trying to replicate and that you're trying to feel. In this film's case, that theme park ride is rather grueling and unpleasant. So I give him a lot of credit in that department. But I just don't think that it ultimately signifies very much. Like, I found the whole experience fairly hollow. And it's interesting because as we get into the nitty gritty of the film, because there's really no plot development to talk about, there's no, like, we're not going to be debating any character motivations here. Like, all we can really talk about is the technical aspects, and the technical aspects are top notch. So I'm about to say like a lot of really positive things about a movie that I ultimately didn't care for that much.
Yeah, I completely agree. Let's get into those technical aspects, because the sound design in this film was absolutely brilliant. It's extremely immersive. It slides between the bombastic and complete silence, both with this loud gun fire and grenades, and the silence associated with our characters disassociating for a moment from their reality, because they are met with this brief time after a particular gruesome event that occurs where they just can't handle the moment. There's the silence and the disassociation and then the coming to. So the sound design associated with all those elements are just extremely well done.
This is true of Civil War too. I really like the way that he uses gunshots. They're not this cool sounding gunshot like if you were watching Bad Boys 3 or something. It's this loud, unpleasant pop that echoes, and it almost like echoes throughout your brain. It gives you this impression that like the action in this film is just very unpalatable, right? In the same way, the explosions are much in the same fashion. Like the explosions here are almost treated like jump scares. You and I had like jolted in our seats a couple times because there are explosions that come out of nowhere, and again, they have this like tinny sound that's really, really unpleasant. And one of my least favorite things in war films is when the violence is almost treated like an action film, like when it's edited in a specific way to look cool, and that's a film that this very distinctly does not do.
Yeah.
This film does not think that violence is cool or interesting. I think the film thinks it's an unpleasant necessity, but it shows you what happens in these circumstances and why it's so grueling.
And obviously, you have to give credit to Ray Mendoza here, because that's where so much of this information comes from. How these operations work, what they look like visually, how they're blocked out. You could look up images from this time period, which I did a little bit of, just the way their stances are on the street and how they blocking each other as they're doing cover fire and things like that. It's like all that is so meticulously planned and organized to make it be so realistic. It was just extremely realistic from that visual perspective as well.
Yeah, it's as effective in its realism as it is in its brutality, and they're one and the same in the film.
Let's talk about that brutality, because I feel like in the end, the film is really an exercise of the brutality of war. I mean, we're not glamorizing anything here. I like that the film doesn't glamorize war, but it just shows it for what it is. And in this particular case, it's extremely gruesome. It's extremely unsettling. I mean, I couldn't help going through this film like feeling like sickened, especially when this type of bomb went off. And I guess they're trying to make sense of what the bomb is, but there are some casualties, there are some injuries, and these injuries were really affecting, I thought. They were just very gruesome.
Yeah, I feel awful that this happened to real people, so I don't want to undermine that in any way. I will say that I wasn't particularly moved by the film, and I think that's because and I don't mean to keep coming back to the same well here, but that's because it did so little to establish things. If this had been a real portrait of people and what their real lives were like, if I got some idea of who they were as people, it would have been a lot easier for me to empathize with what was going on. But to me, being so removed from that, it felt very distancing in a way that I don't think helps the film. But I agree with you. Like the film focuses, especially in the sound, like there's a lot of screaming. People are screaming in agony for like the back half of this movie. It's a really, really unpleasant watch. I wouldn't want it any other way. Let's put it that way. But it didn't affect me quite the way it affected you.
I will say I think that's where our opinions diverge a little bit, because I found it to be very affecting, and I didn't really need more about the people involved to understand the situation that they were in and feel something for them.
This film does what many, many war films do, which is to replicate the experience, except it stops there. Whereas many other war films are able to replicate the experience and then give me everything else that I'm wanting. So I'm not sure why they would like scale it back so dramatically, especially, when you think of a film like The Hurt Locker. I've heard from people in the military that I know that The Hurt Locker is a very realistic film emotionally. So I actually didn't talk to them about if it's a realistic film practically. But anyway, that's a film that I feel like put me very much in the driver's seat of what it was like to be in in Iraqi warfare, but at the same time gave me a really interesting and psychological meditation on what that was all about, which I don't understand why this film strips itself of that. But I know that I keep going back to the same one.
This is almost like the same conversation that we were having in Civil War,
this is always my problem with Alex Garland. Like, it's going to be really interesting. We're going to review on the channel when 28 Years Later comes out, the sequel to 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later, that he scripted. And before he became a feature director, I really liked all the movies that he scripts. And I'm so interested to see if I end up liking that movie, because something about his directorial efforts, man, they just they don't jive with me. And I feel really on the outside of something that people really appreciate. So it's probably a problem with me more than it is with him.
So going from here, I think we should get into spoilers, because there isn't a massive amount in the film narratively that we can really talk about without spoilers, for the few things that I think personally make this film a little deeper than it might come across on the surface. So if you have not seen Warfare, I recommend coming back to this review after you have seen it. Otherwise, we're going to get into spoilers. So I want to get into these breadcrumbs that we were talking about earlier that offer little statements, I think, into our invasion of Iraq. And obviously, this is a very tiny piece in a much larger context. This film, I don't think, has the ability to really say so much about that larger context because it's such a moment in time.
Yep.
But with what it does do, I think it does have some things to say. There's this interesting comparative statement, I think, visually between the opening of this film and the ending of this film. As we see, this Navy SEAL team decides to take over this house. They just pick a house out of the blue for whatever advantage it might have. They storm it and they kind of take this family hostage and situate them in one room, and then they use it as their way of observing all these jihadists. In the end of the film, it's just interesting the way they just abandon the house after it's been almost completely destroyed.
Yeah.
And they just leave this family behind.
I had that same thought. And I really liked, it doesn't end up being the final shot of the film, but like, I guess the final shot of the narrative is all the jihadists just slowly walking out of their hiding places from where they were shooting from, and they all just kind of crowd in the street. And
yeah.
I got this overwhelming feeling of like, okay, it was the same thing before as it is now. They came and a bunch of bad stuff happened and they left, and the jihadists are still there.
Yeah.
Like it did feel like, what is this really for? And I do think that you can't really misinterpret that image. I think that it's very clear that that was supposed to be our little nugget of what was this really for?
And the family, the way the father particularly says, like, it's safe to come outside. Like, we could just go outside.
Yeah.
And he's just leading his family outside without a care in the world, not like there were just bombs and bullets flying around.
It is interesting, too, in the closing credits, they many of the faces are blurred out, but they want to show the character next to the real person, and they do end up showing a picture of the family that was part of this conflict, too. So there is, like, a little bit of a tipping. Like, I think the film understands that it would be kind of cruel and just like not very intellectually sound to not show something about the family. So I think it does that, but it does feel a little perfunctory to me. Like, it feels thrown on, tacked on, almost to divert criticism. But I agree with you. Like, those two parts of the film, I'm like, oh, we're getting somewhere, you know? And then, of course, it just ends. But those were the two, like, little nuggets that I really would have liked to have seen more of throughout the film.
Yeah, and we also get seemingly the wife. She, at one point, is directing towards one of the Navy SEALs, and she says why. She's just constantly saying why.
Yeah, why? Yeah.
Why? And that sound is just burned into my memory, just this question of why with no answer.
Yeah.
And I think in this situation, that's the question that the film really leaves us with, is why. It's not as overt as maybe some people will like it to be, but I do think there's a statement here about just the purpose of this war.
Yeah, I think there's a slight statement. I think you can't misinterpret those images, as I said before, but at the same time, I'm not really looking for like a leftist agenda to be shoved down my throat either. Like, I'm not looking for a film to be like overtly political. I'm looking for an interrogation and a consideration of ideas, which I don't think the film is really doing. What's really interesting about Alex Garland is he seems to be continually taking on very politically charged subject matter while also not making many overt political statements in his film. And I have to wonder why he does that. Another thing that I like about Alex Garland, I have to give him credit for this, is that he's such a provocative filmmaker. Like, I never walk out of his movies and just say, okay, and drive home in silence. Like, the first thing I want to do is sit at this table and start talking about his movies. And what I have to say is not always pleasant or like flattering, but like, I need to talk about his movies the second I get out of them. So I have to give him credit for provoking something in me.
And for me, you know me, I'm a very political type minded person. So for me, I think it would be typically maybe enraging to have to deal with a movie that depoliticizes so many of these political things. But this movie, I don't know. And just like Civil War, I kind of very much respect that way of thinking. And I think that's actually maybe more affecting than if you made something that was a little more political, because it would turn off one side or the other, even coming across as being extremely biased, no matter what, because we just live in such a politicization that it's hard to even make a normal statement anymore.
Yeah, we keep talking about what this film isn't, but at the same time, one of the things it isn't is an alt-right fantasy. It's not that at all.
Yeah.
It's not like a movie that's like, kill those jihadists, like America, hell yeah. It's not like that at all.
Yeah.
So it is like very purposely not, I think, taking a side one way or the other and not turning off either the left or the right.
So you ready to go grades?
Yeah, I'm going to give this movie a C. I'm sorry. I just
What
like...
did you give Civil War? I'm trying to remember.
I think I gave it a C+. plus.
Oh, okay.
I like Civil War a little bit more than this movie. I think in Civil War, there's a lot more to talk about. There's a couple of really, really great scenes in Civil War, and I was just a little more captivated by the filmmaking in Civil War. I think that if he set out to replicate the experience of war, I think he achieved that. It's just, I can't recommend a film that doesn't have like the fundamentals of what I think makes a great film, and that's just my perspective. That's my perspective as a film critic. I understand that like people may disagree with me, and this may be something that's enough for people, and I like legitimately have no judgment about that. But why I watch films is just willfully disregarded in this movie.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's really hard for me to engage with it.
I agree with a lot what you're saying, but I give the film a B+. So I probably just took more from it than you did.
Yep.
As you said, I didn't like it as much as Civil War. I think there was much more to say in that film.
I don't think I'm holding warfare accountable for a thing that it can't do, because I've seen it be done so many times and so successfully. I think that there's something new it could have said within this context while not divorcing itself from that context.
All right, and that's it for our review of Warfare. Warfare is now in theaters, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. Let us know in the comments, what did you think about this film? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.